I sat on the balcony, enveloped in a lovely blanket, letting the cold evening air refresh my face. The sun was slowly falling beyond the horizon, leaving a golden path on the lake's surface. Next to me was a cup of green tea that was still softly steaming, and the aroma of jasmine filled the air. Andrew had just recently moved live with me, following his parents' terrible divorce. At 18, he appeared much older. His eyes were filled with grief and tiredness, as if he had seen much too much for his age. I hadn't seen him appear this contemplative in a long time. Today, he was exceptionally subdued, and I thought he needed time to comprehend everything that had transpired. He called softly to Aunt Evelyn as he came onto the patio. I looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, shuffling uncomfortably from foot to foot to foot. "Is there anything I can assist you with?" I smiled, feeling that his offer was more than simply courtesy. "Of course you can. How about assisting me with the garden? The roses require some extra care. They've been particularly choosy this year." Andrew grinned, and I noticed a sparkle of interest in his eyes. We got the equipment and went to the garden. As we worked together, I began to remember the summer vacations he took with us as a child. Little Andrew is running around the garden in shorts and muddy hands, smiled at me with each remembrance. "Remember when you fell into the pond while trying to capture a frog?" I laughed, remembering him of those amusing moments that earlier seemed so significant. "How could I forget? You jumped in to help me immediately away, only to tumble into the water moments later," he smiled. His eyes sparkled with the same childish delight. We laughed together, and I felt a warm, almost familial tie grow between us once again. The twilight hugged us tenderly with its chill, and I realized that this time had become an oasis in the midst of the emotional storm that both of us had been experiencing in recent months. Once the garden was in order, we returned to the terrace to enjoy the silence and sunset. Just as I believed the day was over, I spotted Andrew staring at me closely. His look contained something new and mysterious, as if he was attempting to comprehend something significant. I felt a little nervous, but opted not to focus on it. Andrew suddenly moved closer to me. "You see," he began quietly, "I've always known you weren't like everyone else. You always understood me better than everyone else." I paused for a second as a warm warmth rose inside. "Andrew, you've always been precious to me." "You know that," I answered gently. His eyes did not leave mine. At some point, I noticed his eyes deepen, as if he'd made an internal decision. Instead of continuing the conversation, he leaned in and gently kissed my lips with his. It was brief, almost ephemeral, but my heart abruptly stopped. I backed away, ashamed and astonished, as a wave of warmth swept over my face. An unpleasant stillness remained in the air, but I didn't want to interrupt the moment. He muttered, "I'm sorry," his voice full of sadness and perplexity. "I'm not sure why I did that." I closed my eyes and drew a long breath. "It's fine," I finally responded, but my thoughts were swirling like autumn leaves in the wind. "Let's just forget about it, okay?" He nodded, but his stare was focused, almost analyzing. I attempted to grin, but something incomprehensible began to creep into my heart. The next day, I awoke early. I hoped to divert myself from the events of the previous evening. In the kitchen, I heard the clatter of dishes and realized Andrew was already up. I wanted to postpone meeting him so I could consider things through, but it was difficult to hide in a small house. I gathered my courage and entered the kitchen, attempting to appear calm. Andrew stood at the stove, frying eggs. He appeared focused, but I observed that he cast a short glance at me. His expression ranged between worry and anticipation. "Good morning," he murmured too pleasantly, as if to relieve some strain. "Good morning," I said, attempting to sound casual. "Breakfast for the both of us?" Of course he smiled, but there was a faint shadow in his smile. We ate breakfast nearly silently, and I sensed an unpleasant quiet between us. I knew I couldn't simply dismiss what had happened, but I was not prepared to bring it up. Finally, I decided that we needed to do something to relieve some of the strain. "Andrew," I said, trying to project as much confidence in my voice as possible, "could you please help me with the old shed? There's something that needs to be fixed, and I can't do it on my own." "Okay, why not?" he responded, evidently enjoying the opportunity to distract himself. We proceeded to the old shed, which contained garden tools and wooden crates. I turned on the lights, and the dim bulbs cast a soft golden glow over the dusty room. We began sorting tools, moving boxes, and deciding what should be saved and what should be discarded. With each minute spent in that small environment, I felt the tension between us increase. His presence appeared too close and palpable. I was burying myself in a shelf, trying to concentrate on what I was doing when I saw his stare on me. You cannot simply pretend nothing occurred. He spoke quietly, his tone a mix of humiliation and determination. I froze, felt my heartbeat quicken. "Andrew, I'm not sure we should be talking about this. I said, trying to sound cool, but within a storm was brewing. He took a step closer, his voice becoming more fierce. No, we have to. Because I believe something significant occurred, and you are also aware of this. I turned away, unsure what to say. His statements were direct, but they also had an emotional impact on me. At that moment I felt his hand on mine. I turned swiftly to face him and saw his eyes, deep and full of feelings he couldn't conceal. I whispered, "Andrew, don't," but he moved closer. I could feel his breath on my skin, and everything else seemed to fade away. He kissed me again, like if he couldn't stop himself. This kiss was very different, more persistent, and with a touch of desperate desperation for a reaction. I remained still for a second, then took a step back, feeling my head spin. "No. This is wrong," I whispered, drawing back but unable to take my sight away from his eyes. I wasn't sure what to do next or how to respond. Everything seemed too complex and hazardous. Andrew instantly moved away, blushing with humiliation. "I'm sorry, but I can't figure out what's happening." His voice quivered, and I understood he wasn't sure what to do. I took a long breath, attempting to find the appropriate words. "Andrew, we need to establish boundaries. What's going on might hurt us both," I replied softly, attempting to calm both him and myself. He nodded, but his gaze indicated that he did not agree. "Just let me figure this out," he mumbled. And I realized that this conversation would continue, like a wave crashing on the shore. We returned home quiet, each engrossed in our thoughts. But I knew one thing. This was simply the beginning of the story, and neither of us would be the same afterward. In the days that followed, I attempted to act as though nothing had happened. I submerged myself in routine and scheduled appointments with pals. I did my domestic tasks and cared to the garden. But every time I saw Andrew, I felt uneasy, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. I observed he was likewise avoiding conversation and eye contact. This made living under the same roof feel weird and unsettling, so I decided we needed to interrupt the cycle of awkwardness and divert ourselves with something very different. "Andrew." One morning during breakfast, I said casually, "How about we go to the farmer's market in the neighboring town today? Could we go for a walk and buy some fresh produce? Maybe it'll help us relax a little." He stared at me, slightly surprised, and then nodded. "Why not?" he continued, his voice steady, but I noticed a spark of thankfulness in his eyes. Perhaps he, too, saw this as an attempt to relieve the stress that had grown almost unbearable. We went to the nearby town via a short road surrounded by meadows and woodlands. I turned on the radio, and the music filled the car, attempting to break the silence between us. We said a few things about the weather, and how long it had been since our last excursion to the market. But everything felt forced and awkward. The market smelled of fresh fruit, pastries, and flowers. We wandered among the stalls. I tried to be pleasant, but I could feel his presence nearby. Too close and palpable. We purchased apples, cheese, and bread. Everything appeared normal, but beneath the surface I sensed something weird and mysterious emerging. As we passed an antique shop, Andrew came to a halt and pointed at the glass. "Evelyn, look," he continued, his voice unusually enthusiastic. I turned to see what he was pointing at: an ancient music box ornamented with tarnished gold and ceramic inserts. For a brief period, my breath caught. I started, but my voice quivered. "It looks like my grandmother's," I finally replied, unable to take my gaze away from the box. "It does." Andrew moved closer, his fingers touching the window glass. "You mentioned that it was very dear to you." I nodded, feeling chills on my skin. Yes, that was her jewelry box. She stored old letters and photographs in it. Andrew remained silent, but I noticed he was watching me attentively, as if trying to figure out why this was so important. "Do you want to go inside?" he inquired gently. I nodded as we entered the antique shop. The inside was dark and smelt of dust. The box was on a shelf with several other neglected items. I took it in my hands and gently opened it. Inside there was an old dried rose and numerous yellowed letters. Andrew looked over the letters, and something in his expression altered. "May I take a look?" he asked carefully. I handed him the letters, and he proceeded to leaf through them, his expression becoming serious. "There's something special about our family," he added, apparently astonished by his revelation, "about several disputes that occurred before I was born." I felt a flash of anxiety growing inside me. I had no idea these letters still existed, I added, instantly wishing to reclaim them from him. But he kept reading, and suddenly his face clouded. "Why didn't you tell me about those incidents, Evelyn?" His speech was subdued, but I could feel his agitation. "This is not something you talk about at dinner." I attempted to make a joke, but I could hear a trembling in my voice. "Andrew, certain things are best left in the past." He nodded, but he did not seem convinced. "Perhaps," he responded quietly. "But I'm starting to realize that there's a lot more buried in our family than appears." The letters, the old music box, and our tension all sent me a cold in my chest. It all started to construct a confusing and troubling image. I didn't know what to do next, but I could tell the issue was slipping out of my grasp. And as we exited the shop, I realized that our journey to the market had not relieved the strain. It had simply made it more palpable and scary. We returned from the market in silence, buried in our own thoughts. The ancient letters and the mysterious music box had exacerbated our already uncomfortable situation. I felt an invisible weight crushing harder against my shoulders. Andrew likewise appeared. Serious. His gaze occasionally shifting to the window, as if he was seeking answers to some inner questions. To help relieve some of the strain, I suggested we go for a stroll to the lake and have a picnic. The lake had always provided me with serenity and tranquility, as well as a sense of safety. I thought that the walk would help both of us achieve some balance. We strolled down a meandering route flanked by thick trees, until we got to the old wooden dock. Andrew quickly recommended that we go for a swim, just like we did when he was a child. "Come on, the water is quite warm," he yelled with a smile that suddenly appeared too bright and urgent. I giggled as I saw him dive into the lake, disturbing the calm surface of the water with 1,000 little splashes. He appeared young and full of life. I immediately felt older and more vulnerable than ever. Water, sun, and his laughing. It all appeared surreal, like a scenario from a distant past when everything was simpler and clearer. Andrew swam back to the shore, his hair soaked, water droplets streaming down his face, and I couldn't take my gaze away from him. He got closer, laughed, and splashed water at me. I flinched in surprise before laughing back. At that point, I felt him get even closer. I got so near that I could hear his heartbeat speed. He peered at me intently, as if attempting to penetrate my thoughts. "You know, Evelyn," he said quietly but confidently. "You have always meant more to me than merely an aunt. I can't hide it any longer." I froze, unsure what to say. There was something hazardous about his comments, as if he had crossed a line I was attempting to draw. Panic spread through me. "Andrew, you don't understand what you're saying," I said, trying to remain cool. "No, I do," he said forcefully, taking another step towards me. "Perhaps you're simply afraid to admit it," and before I could speak, he leaned in and kissed me again. However, this kiss was different. It was full of spontaneity and determination, and something tightened within me. His lips were warm, confused, and intense, as if he were attempting to vent all of his unresolved emotions in this one time. I remained motionless, astonished, but then a weird warmth rose within me. It was as if everything around us had vanished, leaving only the two of us on this old dock, surrounded by the lake's reflective surface. For a little while I gave in to the sensation, but then I immediately drew away, as if waking up from a bizarre dream. This should not have happened. "We have to stop." For a brief period, his face contorted with pain, but he quickly returned to seriousness. "Why?" he inquired gently. "Why are you terrified of this?" I didn't know how to respond, and a sense of helplessness developed within me, because that is incorrect. I finally managed to say, "You are still young. You're simply puzzled." He stepped back. His expression became even more stern. "Do you truly believe this is just confusion?" He spoke harshly. "I feel like I found something genuine here, something that cannot be ignored." "Andrew, we need to go back home," I murmured, trying to change the subject, realizing that this chat was taking us down perilous paths. I turned and walked away from the water, attempting to conceal my quivering palms. I heard him catch up with me, but I didn't glance back. We traveled in quiet, and I sensed something intangible between us, something other than words or acts. I couldn't ignore the shadow, which seemed to grow darker with each step, driving us closer to something unknown and terrible. When we got home, the dusk light crept across the walls, painting them lovely tones of orange and pink. I felt exhausted, like if I'd had a long, deep slumber. Leaves a hazy feeling of uneasiness. Andrew went to his bed, but I stayed in the kitchen, lazily picking through the market purchases. Inside me, a maelstrom of emotions continued to rage, including guilt, fear, anguish, and something more I couldn't describe. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. There was an unexpected harsh knock, as if someone had arrived with urgent news or a pressing situation. I flinched and attempted to open it. I don't know what to expect. My mother, Ella, was standing at the entrance. She had a worried look on her face. "Mom, what has happened?" I inquired, feeling increasingly uneasy within. Ella stared at me intently, as if examining every line of my face. "I need to talk to you," she said, walking into the house as if she owned it rather than being a guest, and she was accompanied by Andrew. I could feel everything inside me clench up. "Why with Andrew?" I asked carefully, locking the door behind her. "Because I know something is going on between you two," she stated frankly, her words hitting me like a blow in the gut. I felt a rush of panic go over me. "What do you mean?" I attempted to pretend ignorance, but my voice trembled. Don't pretend, Evelyn, she said sternly. I've seen how you look at each other and you can't keep that expression off your face. Tell the truth. I felt as if everything inside me had turned upside down. Mom had always been sensitive and overly focused on minutiae. There is nothing between us, Mom, I responded quietly, attempting to keep my voice steady. We are just bewildered. This is a challenging time for both of us. Ella gave me a doubtful look, her expression still harsh. Confused? Evelyn, you understand it's more than that. I overheard Andrew mention something to you this morning. He isn't disguising his emotions. I felt fear rising within me. What exactly did he tell you? I inquired, trying to keep the trembling out of my voice. He didn't say anything specific, she responded. But I saw his face as he went. He is plainly in love with you, Evelyn, and that is bad. You must halt this before things spiral out of control. At that very time, Andrew came in the kitchen doorway. His expression was stern but serene. What exactly are you talking about? He inquired, his gaze flickering between me and Ella. Ella turned to face him and remarked firmly, something is wrong here, you must understand that this cannot continue. Andrew tightened up, and I noticed the same spark in his eyes that I had by the lake. You don't understand, he continued, his voice firm but laced with displeasure. I know how I feel. And this is not just a whim. Stop. Andrew, I intervened, attempting to get control of the situation. You shouldn't talk about it like that. It's more complicated than it appears. Ella turned swiftly to face me. You tell him to stop, but you can't do it yourself. Right? Well, I can't leave it like this. I'll call your father, Andrew, and let him decide what to do. No, Mom, don't, I nearly yelled, feeling my words linger in the air. Unfortunately, it was too late. Andrew, standing in the doorway, froze. Are you serious? He inquired gently. His words, however, carried an undertone of concern. You are going to involve my father. Is that everything you can do? Yes, I am. Ella responded firmly. Because I see you're getting involved in this, and I refuse to let you both ruin your life. Andrew stared at me, his eyes full of despair. Did you know she'd do this? When he asked, I felt everything inside me tense. No, I did not know. I whispered, feeling the sorrow rise up inside. Andrew turned to face Ella. Fine, he replied coldly. If you believe getting my father involved will solve anything, go ahead. But I am leaving. I'm not going to sit here and let you decide what's best for me. He turned and rushed toward the door, not looking back. Ella, furious and angry, made her way to the exit, giving me a final look of disappointment. You should have been smarter, Evelyn, she threw over her shoulder as the door shut behind her. I was left alone in the quiet, empty house, feeling the cold walls close in on me. I realized something crucial had just snapped, like a thin thread that couldn't be reconnected. And whatever came next, I could no longer evade the repercussions.